Belief exploration. You need a master in order to recognise the nature of mind. So the question is that true? In the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, Dzogchen Rinpoche says you can only be introduced by someone who has actually recognised the nature of mind. Now, someone who has recognised the nature of mind may not be a master. How would you know if someone has recognised the nature of mind if they're not a master? Well, when you're in the presence of people who've recognised the nature of mind, if they're in the nature of mind at the time, you can feel it. Now, of course, we can all be in the nature of mind sometimes, but once we have lost that, we can behave quite atrociously, as Dzogchen Rinpoche has shown us. According to the Dzogchen teachings, the student needs devotion and openness of mind, and the person introducing needs to have a realization of the nature of mind and the blessing of the lineage. Now, out of that, it's fairly obvious that you can't be introduced to the nature of mind by someone who doesn't experience it. Whether or not that person sets themselves up as a master or not is, I think, beside the point. So the blessing of the lineage part, well, I don't know. What that does is give you a method. If you've got the blessing of the lineage, then you know how to do it, and you know how to do it formally. And you're doing it to students who know what you're doing. So obviously in that situation, it's going to be more likely that you'll receive an introduction to the nature of mind than if it's just an ordinary person who has realised the nature of mind but doesn't have a method unless intuitively they know what they're doing. So what the Dzogchen teachings give you is language and method in which to recognise the nature of mind in a formal way. But this is actually only talking about introducing you to the nature of mind. And Dzogchen Rinpoche says in the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying that we can have experiences of the nature of mind. We can have them while we're in nature, perhaps watching a sunset, that kind of thing. Whether we recognise that that's what we're experiencing or not is something else. But if we recognise that what we're experiencing is a state that it's worth returning to, that's worth investigating, that's worth evoking in ourselves, it is possible that we could do it on our own. And by I say doing it in our own, meaning that we could bring that experience into our life all by ourselves. However, let's face it, you'd have to be a pretty special person. It's the introduction that you need a master for in order to recognise the experience. So you may have had the experience before, but you probably haven't gone, that's it, that's the state that I need to cultivate. We're kind of indoctrinated to think that only the lamas can do it because only the lamas have the blessing of the lineage. Now, that's kind of like, that really is shoring up the religion and cementing the place of the lamas in that religion as being top dogs and really, really important. And what that doesn't do is it doesn't recognise that students may have this realisation and that their presence, anyone who's had the realisation of the nature of mind, anyone who's resting in the nature of mind, has an aura, has a presence that affects the people around them. So if you're sitting in meditation and other people are sitting in meditation with you, assuming that you're resting in the nature of mind, they will feel it. And if they are open to you and tune into you, why wouldn't they also get the experience of the nature of mind, just in the same way that the lamas do it? Why not? Do you really need the stamp from the lamas? Now, according to what some people tell me about the history of the beginning of Rigpa, Sogyal Rinpoche didn't actually have Dzogchen Rinpoche's blessing to teach. He was actually told to go off into retreat. But instead of doing that, he set up Rigpa. So that foundation of having the blessing of the lineage is a bit dodgy. And yet he introduced a lot of us to the nature of mind. Now some people will scoff and say, how could somebody like that do that? Well, it's what I said. If he's sitting in the nature of mind, he can introduce you to the nature of mind. If you're sitting in the nature of mind, why couldn't you also introduce someone to the nature of mind? I mean, most of the time, there wasn't any fancy method. It was just by his presence and by the words that he was saying. And people still got it in that situation. Yeah, sometimes there was a snap of the finger and the turning your mind. But this is a guy whose qualifications for doing that are highly questionable. What he has is his devotion to his lamas, and that's what gave him the power in order to introduce us to the nature of mind. Right. So, that's within that formal belief system. So to summarise, we don't need a master to experience the nature of mind. Even Sogyal Rinpoche says that in the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. The reason we need the master is so that we know what that experience is. What he brings to the mix is a system for consciously introducing us to the nature of mind so that we're in a situation where we can say, yes, that's it. So the question this leads to, for someone who hasn't recognised the nature of mind, they're going, okay, so if I want to recognise the nature of mind, I need to find a lama and I need to have devotion for doing that. And you might feel like, oh God, this is so dangerous, after the Rigpa experience and all these other sanghas where we find out that the lama's abusing the students, then you don't want to get into that situation. So what do you do? Is there an alternative? I think there is. The alternative is not Dzogchen. It's Mahamudra. That's how I see it. I have just finished studying Mahamudra. And what Mahamudra has that Dzogchen doesn't have is more methods. Now, in this Mahamudra course that I did with Mingyur Rinpoche, in 6 months, there were, I think it was 5 or 6 mentions of devotion. The whole thing was focused on methods of investigation, of actually looking at your experience, at how you perceive things, and seeing for yourself. Now, those methods did not require devotion for the Lama. What they require is for you to have those instructions and to do the work yourself. Now, these days, you can buy the books. Of course, it's not the same as having somebody actually talk to you. So that is recommended. A teacher is recommended because it's just a lot harder for us to work this out on our own. And of course, the beauty of the Tibetan tradition is that it has well-established methods that have had results. Unfortunately, I haven't seen those results in Rigpa. I think it's probably because the people close to Sogyal Rinpoche who, should be focusing on this were basically put down all the time. So how could they develop confidence in their own true nature, in the deepest level of self-esteem that you can have? If your self-esteem is always being crushed, then it's pretty hard to have faith in that self-esteem, in that basic sense of your own goodness and worth. In Mahamudra, the teacher does point out the nature of mind. And that's this pointing to the experience so that you can go, yes, that's it. Now I know for sure. But I didn't see in the 6 months that I did this course, I didn't see any insistence on devotion. No, well, you need devotion in order to get it. None of that at all. So Mahamudra has other methods other than devotion. So having a master will obviously speed up the process. That's the whole point of the tradition. Though it seems that some lamas forget that. I think the whole point of the tradition is to keep them in their lavish lifestyles with lots of little slaves running around and doing their bidding. They say one thing, but one wonders what their real motivations are. But I do believe that there are genuine masters. They are probably just quietly getting on with their business with a few students, having a high profile, a glossy resume means nothing. The system does work, but it doesn't mean that your devotion has to be devoid of discernment. And once you get into a sangha where devotion is demanded, I think you're in dangerous territory. Devotion is something that should be allowed to develop naturally. I think an openness and respect is much, much better in terms of communicating that whole concept. Because even though you might say, well, devotion is not blind devotion, it has, the word has that connotation. And Westerners tend to fall into that highly emotional, blind faith version of devotion. So you definitely don't need a master in order to experience the nature of mind. And a master who knows what he's doing is more likely to be able to introduce you to the nature of mind in a sense of saying, yes, that's it, than someone who doesn't have that training, obviously. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't be introduced to the nature of mind by someone who has realised it, even if they're not a master. I think the thing to realise is there are options. To understand that Dzogchen is the path of devotion. And there are dangers with any lama or any group who demands your devotion. Anyone who says, well, no, you're not allowed to criticise the lama after you've accepted them as the Vajra master. Anyone who says that as a kind of firm thing, I would avoid that person as a master, personally, because it's this demanding of devotion that is dangerous. Devotion should come from the student's natural growing respect for a teacher who is worthy of that respect. In Dzogchen, the idea is that you generate devotion, that you fake it until it becomes a reality in you. That's fair enough, but it does kind of lead to a situation where we're all playing at having devotion. We're all really trying really very, very hard to have devotion. And I think that's not real good. Mahamudra, in my experience, does not demand devotion in the same way that Dzogchen does. So do we need a master in order to recognise the nature of mind? We don't need a master in order to experience the nature of mind. I don't even think we need a master in order to be introduced to the nature of mind. But it's clearer. A master has the language, has the skills, has the system of thought which will make it easier for a student to actually recognise it and be able to label it and, therefore to be able to, I was going to say generate that experience, but it's actually a matter of letting all the shit go. So having a master will speed up the process. So the question then is choosing your master carefully. Normal people can be basically saints in disguise, people who have recognized the nature of mind, and being in their presence can introduce you to the nature of mind. Now, obviously, if someone knows what they're doing, then it's going to work better. And in that system and in that way, you can say you need a master to recognize the nature of mind. And by recognition, I don't mean experiencing it. I mean being able to say, that's it. Now, that's what the introduction is. It's pointing out. Now, it's important to know that you have choices, that you don't have to go for a devotion-centric system. There is Dzogchen and there is Mahamudra. And Mahamudra has a lot of different ways for you to recognize the nature of mind that actually have nothing to do with the master. Once you've got the instructions, it's basically up to you to go away and practice. Of course, there is pointing out instructions that you get directly from the Lama, and these are part of that tradition. But my feeling is actually that by these inquiries alone, because they're so powerful, that they bring you to the state of the nature of mind anyway. But you would want to go to a master at some point just to be sure that you did have it right. But even so, the Mahamudra that I studied has these amazing instructions on what isn't the nature of mind. And we never got that in Rigpa. And they were so good. So needing a master so that you recognize, that is it, doesn't mean that you have to have blind devotion to that master. Anyway, that's how I see it. Yeah, it's helpful to have a master to point out the nature of mind, to say, that's it. But any idea that you need a master in order to experience the nature of mind, that's wrong. And it's an emphasis on the Lama's part that could forget that little point and emphasize the role of the Lama. So where the role of the Lama is being emphasized, and that fact that the nature of mind is something that you could experience while sitting at the beach and watching the sunset, that it is native to you. A Lama that doesn't honor the fact that his students actually do have Buddha nature and therefore do have value, and therefore he should not be crushing their self-esteem and damaging their potential for trusting themselves. That kind of master is one that you need to avoid. And so whatever happens in Rigpa, whatever the Lamas do or don't do, in the end, the message we need to get to students is to check out those masters really, really carefully. To look at the behaviour of their Sangha. If the Sangha is full of people who are saying nasty things about people who are talking like this, who are making examinations, then personally, I would avoid that Sangha. Anyway, that's it. That's the end of this little examination of that belief, and I hope that you have found it helpful. And if you think other people might benefit from hearing somebody examine a belief like this, then please do share, like, comment. All of this kind of stuff helps people to find videos like this, and helps anyone who sees it to go into a relationship with a master with their eyes open. And that is what we want